gates and told, "Today isn't a good day, come back after Thursday." How can the Prime Minister justify this disgraceful dismissal of the people of Copeland?
Prime Minister.
A petition was indeed delivered to Number 10. The petition was accepted by Number 10 Downing Street yesterday. So I suggest to the Honourable Lady that she considers what she said in her question. But I am aware of the issues that have been raised around West Cumberland Hospital. I'm aware of those because the very good Conservative candidate in Copeland, Trudy Harrison, has indeed raised those issues with me. She's made very clear she wants to see no downgrading of services at West Cumberland Hospital. She's made that clear to me and to health ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've recently been meeting with many of my local head teachers in the High Peak, and they're concerned about the new national funding formula. Can my right honourable friend assure me that when we decide on the funding for our schools, that we will look at unavoidable costs such as the national apprenticeship levy and things like that to ensure they do have the money that they need to educate our children?
Minister.
Well, thank my honourable friend for raising this. It is the question of schools funding, the system we have for schools funding, is important. I think the current system is unfair. It isn't transparent and it's out of date. That's been a general view across for some time now. Because the problem is it can't support the aspiration of all our children to get a great education. And we do indeed want to see children being able to get the education that they deserve, that ensures that they can go as far as their talents and hard work take them. The Labour government did nothing to address the funding system. We are looking at that funding system. It is a consultation, and I'm sure the comments on the issue my honourable friend has raised will be noted by the Secretary of State for Education.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When hospitals are struggling to provide essential care, why is the Prime Minister's government cutting the number of beds in our National Health Service?
Prime Minister.
Thanks to the medical advances, to the use of technology, to the quality of care, what we see in hospital stays is actually that the average length of time for staying in hospital has virtually halved since the year 2000. But let's actually look at Labour's record on this issue. In the last 6 years of the last Labour government, 25,000 hospital beds were cut. But we don't even need to go as far back as that. Let's just look at what was Labour's policy before the last election. Because before the last election, the Right Honourable Member for Lee, a former Labour Shadow Health Secretary, said the following: "What I'd cut are hospital beds. Labour policy cut hospital beds."
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, there was the highest ever level of satisfaction with the National Health Service delivered by a Labour government. The British Medical Association tells us, Mr. Speaker, the British Medical Association, its doctors, that 15,000 beds have been cut in the last 6 years, the equivalent of 24 hospitals, and as a result, we have longer waiting times at A&E, record delayed charges, and more people on waiting lists. The Prime Minister claims the NHS is getting the money it needs, so why is it that 1 in 6 of A&E units in England are set for closure or downgrading?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentleman, what is happening and what has happened since 2010 in A&E. We see 1,500 more emergency care doctors. That includes 600 more A&E consultants. We've got 2,400 more paramedics. We have more people being seen in accident and emergency every single week under this government. What the NHS... He talks about what the NHS needs. What the NHS needs is more doctors. We're giving it more doctors. What it needs is more funding. We're giving it more funding. What it does not need is a bankrupt economy, which is exactly what Labour would give it.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Prime Minister why 1 in 6 A&E units are currently set for closure or downgrading. She didn't answer. One of the problems, and she well knows this, is the £4.6 billion cut to social care, which has a knock-on effect. And her friend, the Tory chair of the Local Government Association, Lord Porter, has said, and I quote, "Extra council tax income will not bring in anywhere near enough money to alleviate the growing pressure on social care." 2 weeks ago, we found out about the sweetheart deal with Tory Surrey. When will the other 151 social services departments in England get the same as the Surrey deal?
Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman refers to the questions he asked me about Surrey County Council 2 weeks ago. Those claims were utterly destroyed the same afternoon. So rather than asking the same question, he should stand up and apologise.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, far from apologising, it's the Prime Minister who ought to be reading her correspondence and answering the letter from 62 council leaders representing social services authorities who want to know if they're going to get the same deal as Surrey as they are grappling with a crisis which has left over 1 million people not getting the social care they need. Mr. Speaker, we opposed the Tory cuts in the NHS which involved scrapping of nurses' bursaries because we feared it would discourage people from entering training. Her government said removing funding for nurses' bursaries would create an extra 10,000 training places in this Parliament. Has this target been met?
Prime Minister.
There are 10,000 more training places available for nurses in the NHS. But the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about the amount of money that is being spent on the National Health Service. It is this Conservative government that is putting the extra funding into the NHS. And I remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that we are spending £1.3 billion more on the NHS this year than Labour planned to do if they'd won the election.
Mr. Speaker, my questions were about the social services funding to pay for social care. No answer. My questions were about the number of nurse training places that are being brought in. No answer. In reality, 10,000 fewer places have been filled because there are fewer applications. There is a problem being built up for the future. And in addition to that, the Royal College of Midwives estimates there's a shortage of 3,500 midwives in England, and the Royal College of Nursing warned the nursing workforce is in crisis. And if fewer nurses graduate in 2020, it will exacerbate what is already an unsustainable situation. Will the Prime Minister at least commit herself to reinstating the nurses' bursary?
Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman asked me a question about nursing training places, which I answered. I have to say to him, if he doesn't like the answer he gets, he can't just carry on asking the same question if I've answered it previously. He's talking about all these issues in relation to what is happening in the NHS. Let's just look at what is happening in the NHS. We have 1,800 more midwives in the NHS since 2010. We have more people being seen in accident and emergency since 2010. We have more operations taking place every week in the National Health Service. Our National Health Service staff are working hard. They're providing a quality of care for patients up and down the country. What they don't need is a Labour Party policy that leads to a bankrupt economy, because Labour's policy is you spend money on everything, which means you bankrupt the economy, have no money to spend on anything. That doesn't help doctors and nurses, it doesn't help patients, it doesn't help the NHS, and it doesn't help ordinary working families up and down this country.
Mr. Speaker, yes, let's look at the National Health Service. Let's thank all those that work so hard in our National Health Service, but recognise the pressures they're under. Today, the Marie Curie Foundation Trust finds that nurses are so overstretched they cannot provide the high-quality care needed for patients at the very end of their lives. The lack of caring community prevents people the dignity of dying at home. There is a nursing shortage. Something should be done about it, such as reinstating the nurses' bursary. Mr. Speaker, her government has put the NHS and social care in a state of emergency. 9 out of 10 NHS trusts are unsafe. 18,000 patients a week are waiting. Mr. Speaker, I repeat the figure. 18,000 patients a week are waiting on trolleys in hospital corridors. 1.2 million, often very dependent. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that some members don't want to be concerned about the fact that there are 1.2 million elderly people not getting the care that they need. The legacy of her government will be blighting our NHS for decades. Fewer hospitals, fewer A&E departments, fewer nurses, and fewer people getting the care they need. We need a government that puts the NHS first and will invest in our NHS.
First of all, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that he should consider correcting the record, because 54% of hospital trusts are considered good or outstanding, quite different from the figure that he has shown. Secondly, I will take no lessons on the NHS from the party. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party says we should take lessons from the NHS. I won't take any lessons from the party that presided over Mid-Staffs Hospital and the day when it happened in Mid-Staffs Hospital. They say we should learn lessons. I'll tell you who should learn lessons. It's the Labour Party, who still fail to recognise if you're going to fund the NHS, and we are putting more money in, there are more doctors, more operations, more nurses. If you're going to fund the NHS, you need a strong economy. But now we know Labour have a different sort of phrase now for their approach to these things. Remember, Labour used to talk about boom and bust? Now it's no longer boom and bust, it's borrow and bankrupt.
We must get through backbenchers' questions and the Prime Minister's answers to them. Mr. Michael Tomlinson.
Mr. Speaker, Brendan Cox will meet today with the Duchess of Cornwall to launch plans to bring communities together over the weekend of the 17th and 18th of June to mark the first anniversary of our colleague Jo's death. The aim of this, which has been called the Great Get-Together, is for more than 10 million people across the country to come together as communities and neighbours for events such as street parties, for picnics, and, Mr. Speaker, even bake-offs. Will the Prime Minister join me and agree that such events, a moment of national reflection, but also celebration in our communities, will be a fitting tribute to Jo, and, as she herself said, remind us all that we have far more in common with each other than things that divide us?
Prime Minister.
I say to my honourable friend that I think he raises an extremely important point. I'm very happy to agree with him that as he says, what is becoming known as the Great Get-Together is a fitting and, I think, important tribute to our late colleague, Jo Cox, and I would like to commend her husband, Brendan. I'm sure everybody around this house, across this House will wish to do so, for the work that he's done. As my honourable friend says, it is important that we remember that there is more that brings us together than divides us, and I think this opportunity at this point of national reflection and celebration of the strength of our communities is an important one. As we face this future together, we do stand at momentous times for this country, and I think it's important that we remember that being united makes us strong, that we should recognise the things that unite us as a country and as a people, the bonds that we share together, and I think this is a very fitting tribute to our late colleague.
Angus Robertson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent days, the
We'll be back to Prime Minister's questions in a moment, but just breaking news.
To transform the
The partner of the best-selling children's author Helen Bailey has just been found guilty of her murder at St Albans Crown Court. Let's go straight to the court. Our correspondent there, Ben Ando. Ben, this verdict just through. Tell us what you heard.
Yes, that's right. The jury had been out for just over 24 hours, returning with verdicts of guilty on all the counts that Ian Stewart faced. He was guilty of murdering Helen Bailey, his fiancée, the well-known writer, guilty of fraud, trying to change a standing order to his benefit of £4,000 a month, guilty of preventing a lawful burial by putting her body in a cesspit beneath the garage of their home in Royston in Hertfordshire, and guilty too of 3 counts of perverting the course of justice, of disposing of bedding that would have been incriminating evidence against him, deceiving the police and disposing of her mobile phone. The jury here clearly seeing through the story that he spun in the witness box, claiming that she had been abducted by 2 mysterious business associates of her husband he called Joe and Nick. Clearly a fabrication just made up to try to explain away the evidence against him, as my colleague June Kelly now reports.
Police recorded Ian Stewart's arrest at his home.
Arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Helen Bailey.
Are you joking? He was stunned he'd finally been caught out. For 3 months he'd been living with the body of his wealthy partner buried under the garage.
Why? I don't understand. My name's Helen Bailey, and I'd like to introduce you to my new book, which is called When Bad Things Happen in Good Bikinis.
Helen Bailey was a successful author. As well as murdering her, Stewart also killed her dachshund Boris, whom she doted on.
Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen.
After her husband's death, Helen Bailey began blogging about her sense of loss. And it was through a Facebook bereavement group that she met Ian Stewart, whose wife had died. She thought she'd found a new soulmate, but while she was planning their wedding, he was planning her murder. Last spring, Helen Bailey suddenly vanished from their £1 million home in Royston in Hertfordshire. It took Ian Stewart 5 days to report her missing.
Please, how can I help?
Hello there. My partner has been missing since Monday and not contacted anyone.
Despite appeals from family and friends, there was no sign of Helen Bailey. 3 months after she disappeared, police came back here and began searching places they hadn't looked at before, including a spot in the garage. The garage was at a distance from the house. Helen Bailey's Jeep had been parked over a hatch door. Underneath it was a well with a cesspit. The police began probing, and it was here, below a layer of sewage, that they saw an arm. They had found Helen Bailey's body, and buried with her was her dog, Boris. There was even a possibility that she could have been alive when Stewart put her in the cesspit. This CCTV shows how within hours Ian Stewart drove to a rubbish tip to destroy evidence. He dumped a duvet.
Was that duvet taken to the tip because it had Helen's blood on it?
In police interviews, Stewart said nothing. He probably smothered Helen Bailey after drugging her over a long period with his sleeping pills. His motive was money. He was set to benefit massively from her £4 million fortune.
If Helen had written a book of the story, you wouldn't believe it. He'd probably planned it all from the day he met her, and in hindsight, I don't think he loved her at all. But Helen definitely loved him.
This is Ian Stewart's late wife, Diane. With his criminal trial over, we can now report that the police are re-examining her sudden death, said to have been caused by an epileptic fit. At this stage, there's no indication of anything suspicious.
Well, I think it's only right that I consider what might have happened in Ian Stewart's past, to see whether there's anything that I need to get involved in, whether there's any fresh evidence that might have come out from this trial.
At the family home in Bassingbourn in Cambridgeshire, Diane Stewart suddenly collapsed. She'd suffered from epilepsy when she was younger.
Diane was a very fit and healthy person. The whole of Bassingbourn was in shock. I think it couldn't believe it could have happened because there was no sign or prior knowledge that was anything wrong with Diane whatsoever.
After his wife died, Ian Stewart was seen with other women before he began his predatory pursuit of Helen Bailey. As a writer, she was used to studying human behaviour, but she never learned the true character of the man who was closest to her and who she thought she knew best. June Kelly, BBC News, Hertfordshire.
Well, to be fair, the evidence against Ian Stewart was pretty overwhelming, but it's clear the jury had taken on board the judge's instruction as he ordered them to retire yesterday, that they should take their time and not rush to a verdict. But as that verdict was given, Ian Stewart, sitting in the dock, showed little or no emotion.
It's absolutely heartbreaking, isn't it, Ben, hearing that she thought she'd met her soulmate, and we're hearing in our report there from friends and family saying that he was probably planning to kill her from the day he met her. What reaction has there been in court?
Well, yes, I mean, this is clearly traumatic for Helen's family and indeed for the wider community, people she knew or people who felt they knew her, both through her blogging about her own grief at the death of her first husband, and also perhaps people who were familiar with her writing, her novels, especially the Electra Brown series of teenage books. In court, her family were there, her brother John and his partner were there. They nodded as the verdict was given. Certainly this is a case that has been very difficult for them. It's not immediately apparent whether they will give any reaction later. They have indicated they don't wish to, and of course we'll respect that.
And we are actually expecting to hear from the police in 20 minutes or so. And as we were hearing in June's report, we can now report that police are re-examining the death of Ian Stewart's previous partner, Diane, who died suddenly.
Yes, that's right. Diane Stewart, her maiden name is Diane Lem. She's the mother, of course, of their two children, Jamie and Oliver, who both gave evidence today. Only one of his sons in court to hear the verdict just now. And yes, police saying they're going to look again at that. Until now, it's always been thought that her death was one of natural causes. She had suffered from epilepsy and had been on medication for that. At the moment, it has to be stressed, there are no suspicious circumstances around her death. Nonetheless, it would be incredibly surprising if the police were not to look again at the circumstances of that. I understand they are already looking at pathological reports from the time of her death, and further inquiries are certain to ensue.
Thank you very much. And I said that we are expecting to hear from police in 20 minutes or so outside the court, so we will go back there for that reaction and any other reaction outside the court in St Albans. But if you're just joining us, let me just remind you of our breaking news. Ian Stewart has been found guilty of the murder of his partner, the author Helen Bailey, following a trial at St Albans Crown Court. He buried her body in a cesspit at their home in Royston in Hertfordshire. Now, some other news this lunchtime. The government has won its legal battle to stop thousands of British citizens from bringing their foreign husbands or wives to live in the UK without a